My name is Mark Ryland. I'm 47 years old, and for 20 of those years, I owned and operated a small land surveying company based out of Roanoke, Virginia. Before that, I spent 6 years with the Army Corps of Engineers. I've spent my entire adult life working outdoors, in some of the most remote and rugged terrain this country has to offer. I know how to read a map, a compass, and the land itself. I know the sounds of the woods, the tracks of its animals, and the feel of the air before a storm. I say all this not to brag, but to establish a fact. I am not a man given to flights of fancy. I am grounded, practical, and I trust what my senses and my experience tell me. Which is why what I'm about to tell you is so difficult, both to say and to live with. Because what I saw in October of 2011, in a forgotten hollow in the deep woods of West Virginia, defies every rational, practical thing I ever knew. The job was a standard contract, the kind that was our bread and butter. A timber company had acquired a large 1,000-acre tract of undeveloped land deep in the Monongahela National Forest. Our task was to perform a boundary survey, mark the property lines, and generate a topographical map for their logging crews. It was remote work, the kind I loved. The access road was a crumbling asphalt strip that turned into 10 miles of gravel, and then, finally, a rutted dirt track that was barely passable in our four-wheel drive truck. The company had arranged for us to use an old hunting cabin on the edge of the property as a base camp. It saved us a 2-hour drive each way, every day. There were 3 of us on the crew, me, my partner Cal, and a new hire named Brian. Cal and I had been working together for over a decade. He was ex-Navy, a former Seabee, steady and quiet, and just as comfortable in the backcountry as I was. We could work for hours without saying more than a few words, communicating with hand signals and shared understanding. Brian was the opposite. He was 23, fresh out of a tech program, and full of the kind of loud, unearned confidence that only the young can pull off. He was good with the new GPS gear and the data collectors, but the woods made him antsy. He filled the silence with constant chatter, bad jokes, and the tinny buzz of music from his phone. The cabin was rustic, to put it politely. A single room with a pot-belly stove, 3 cots, and a propane generator out back for power. No running water, just a hand pump over a shallow well. But it was dry and solid, and the view from the small porch was of nothing but rolling, tree-covered hills as far as the eye could see. For the first 2 days, things were completely normal. We'd get up before dawn, fire up the generator to make coffee, and head out into the woods with our total station, GPS rovers, and machetes. The work was tough. The terrain was steep and choked with rhododendron thickets that we had to hack through. By the end of the day, we were exhausted, scratched up, and soaked in sweat. Brian complained constantly about the bugs, the hills, the lack of cell service. Cal and I mostly ignored him. It was just noise. On the evening of the second day, Brian was making a show of being miserable. "Man, I swear I'm going to have an actual conversation with a squirrel tomorrow," he'd said, flopping onto his cot. "This silence is deafening." Cal looked up from cleaning his boots. "That's the point, kid. It's not silent. You're just not listening." It was the kind of thing Cal said, cryptic and true. And it was true. The woods had a sound all its own, the rustle of leaves, the call of a distant hawk, the drone of insects, a constant, living hum. The 3rd day is when things started to feel off. We were working our way down a steep ravine, following an ancient, moss-covered stone wall that marked part of the southern boundary. It was slow going. I was on the instrument, the total station, while Cal and Brian alternated working the prism rod, leapfrogging their way through the trees. Around noon, Cal called me on the radio. His voice was flat, but I could hear an undercurrent I didn't recognize. "Mark, You might want to come take a look at this." I left the instrument on its tripod and made my way down the slope, grabbing onto saplings to keep my footing. I found Cal and Brian standing in a small clearing near the creek at the bottom of the ravine. The air in that little pocket of woods was cold and still. The usual hum of the forest was gone. It was dead silent, the kind of silence that presses in on your eardrums. In the center of the clearing was a deer, or what was left of one. It was a large buck, and it had been torn to pieces. Now, I've seen predator kills before. Plenty of them. I've seen what bears can do, what coyotes and bobcats leave behind. This was not that. This was different. The animal's rib cage had been cracked open, almost like a clamshell, and the organs were gone. But it wasn't just eaten. The legs were bent at angles that were sickeningly wrong, the bones clearly snapped. The head was twisted around almost completely backward. But the strangest thing was the way the hide was peeled back from the torso in wide, deliberate strips. There were no bite marks I could see, not the kind a bear or a pack of coyotes would leave. It looked less like it had been fed on, and more like it had been dismantled. "What the hell did this?" Brian asked, his voice a little shaky. He'd finally lost some of his bravado. "Bear," Cal said, but he didn't sound convinced. He was walking a slow circle around the carcass, his eyes scanning the ground. "Big one. Angry one." I knelt down, looking at the mud near the creek bed. "I don't know, Cal. A bear would have dragged it off, cached it. And look at these." I pointed to the ground. There were tracks. They were huge, bigger than any bear track I'd ever seen. And the shape was wrong. It was elongated, almost like a massive human footprint, but the toes were too long, and at the end of each one was a deep, vicious-looking claw mark. But the most unsettling part was the stride. They were spaced far apart, and they were in a clear line, one in front of the other. It wasn't the shuffling, four-legged gait of a bear. It was bipedal. Brian let out a nervous laugh. "Okay, so Bigfoot is real. Awesome. Can we get out of this creepy-ass ravine now?" He was trying to make a joke of it, but his eyes were wide. Cal ignored him. "It walked on two legs," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He looked at me, and I saw real concern in his face for the first time on the job. We both knew the woods. We both knew what was out there, and this wasn't on the list. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was two sets of tracks, one on top of the other, making it look like one. Maybe the ground was soft and had distorted a bear track. Maybe a poacher had shot the deer and a bear had found it. None of the explanations felt right. They were thin and weak, and the cold silence of the hollow seemed to mock them. We didn't talk much for the rest of the day. We finished the line, packed up our gear, and headed back to the cabin, casting nervous glances over our shoulders the entire way. The sun was setting, painting the undersides of the clouds orange and purple, but the beauty of it was lost on me. All I could feel was a growing sense of dread, like a cold knot in the pit of my stomach. That night, the temperature dropped. We got a fire roaring in the potbelly stove and cooked our dinner in silence. Brian tried to lighten the mood, playing music on his phone, but the cheerful pop songs sounded jarring and out of place. After a while, even he gave up, and we just sat there, listening to the crackle of the fire and the wind sighing in the pines outside. The vibrant, living sound of the forest we were used to was gone. The world outside our cabin walls was utterly, unnervously quiet. It was the same dead silence from the ravine, and it had followed us home. Around 10 o'clock, we were getting ready to turn in. I was standing on the porch, finishing a cup of coffee, just trying to settle my nerves. The moon was nearly full, and it cast a pale, skeletal light over the clearing in front of the cabin. That's when I heard the first sound that was definitively wrong. It was a branch snapping, not the small crackle of a twig under a raccoon's foot. This was a thick, loud crack, like a 2x4 being broken over a knee. It came from the edge of the woods, maybe 50 yards away. I froze, every muscle in my body tensed. I listened, holding my breath. For a long minute, there was nothing but the wind. Then I heard it again, closer this time, and another, even closer. Something heavy was moving through the woods, and it wasn't trying to be quiet. It was moving with a confidence, a deliberateness, that made the hair on my arms stand up. I backed into the cabin, closing and bolting the heavy oak door behind me. "What is it?" Cal asked. He was already on his feet. "Something's out there," I said. "Something big." Brian sat up on his cot, his face pale in the lantern light. "Probably just that bear," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. We turned off the lantern, plunging the cabin into near darkness, lit only by the faint orange glow from the stove's vents. We stood by the single window, peering out into the moonlit clearing. For what felt like an eternity, nothing happened. Then a shape emerged from the tree line. It was huge, a hulking silhouette against the darkness of the forest. It stopped at the edge of the clearing, and it just stood there, perfectly still. It was too tall for a bear, and it was standing on 2 legs. My blood ran cold. It was at least 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Its shoulders were immense, impossibly broad. But it was the head that made my mind recoil. It was long and tapered, like a wolf's or a dog's, with 2 pointed ears pricked and alert on top of its head. It tilted its head slightly, as if it were listening, sniffing the air. It was the thing from the tracks, and it was looking right at our cabin. We all stood there, paralyzed, not daring to breathe. The thing took a step forward, then another. It moved with a strange, loping gait. Its arms were too long for its body, and they swung loosely at its sides. The joints in its legs seemed to bend backward, like a bird's or a dog's. It was a grotesque mockery of a human form, a nightmarish fusion of man and beast. It crossed the clearing with a horrifying speed and stopped right in front of the porch. It was so close now, I could hear it breathing, a low, guttural rasp, like air being forced through a wet sieve. Then it did something that shattered the last of my composure. It reached out one of its long arms, and I saw its hand. It wasn't a paw. It was a hand, with 5 long, slender fingers, tipped with thick, black claws. And with that hand, it reached for the doorknob. We heard the brass knob turn, slowly, deliberately. The lock held. The creature rattled the knob once, twice, a test of strength. Then there was a low growl of frustration, a sound that vibrated through the floorboards and up my legs. It began to circle the cabin. We could hear its heavy footsteps crunching on the gravel path that surrounded the building. Thump, thump, thump. A slow, measured, predatory patrol. It would pause, and we would hear sniffing sounds, loud and wet, right against the wooden planks of the walls. It was smelling us, hunting us. We scrambled away from the walls, huddling together in the center of the room, our backs to the stove. "What is that thing?" Brian whispered, his voice cracking with terror. "I don't know," Cal breathed, his hand resting on the handle of the large camp axe that was leaning against the wall. "But it wants in." The circling stopped. For a moment, there was silence again. Then came a sound of splintering wood. It was at the back of the cabin. It was trying to claw its way through the wall. We could hear the long scrapes of its claws gouging deep furrows into the timber. The entire cabin shuddered with the force of it. Then the sound stopped, and the footsteps resumed, circling back to the front. It stopped at the window. We were crouched below the sill, but we could feel its presence, a palpable aura of malevolence just on the other side of the glass. A shadow fell across the floor as it blocked out the moonlight. Suddenly, there was a loud bang against the shutters. It had slammed its fist against them. Then again. Bang, bang. The heavy wooden shutters, which had seemed so sturdy, groaned in protest. I had a rifle, a lever-action .30-30 I always kept in the truck for emergencies. But the truck was 100 feet away, across an open clearing currently occupied by a monster from a fever dream. All we had were 2 hand axes and a couple of heavy maglite flashlights. The assault on the shutters stopped. The footsteps moved away from the cabin. We waited, listening, our hearts pounding in our chests. Maybe it had given up. Maybe it had gone. The silence stretched on. 1 minute, 2, 5. Brian started to relax, letting out a shaky breath. "I think it's gone," he said, and that's when we heard the voice. It was a high, thin sound, coming from the edge of the woods. "Help me," it called out. It sounded like a woman's voice, strained and full of pain. "Please, I'm hurt." We all froze. It was a trick. It had to be. "No one could be out here." "Don't listen," Cal hissed. "It's not real." The voice came again, more desperate this time. "Please, my car broke down. I think my leg is broken. Help." Brian was looking at the door, his face a mask of conflict. He was young, and his instincts were to help someone in distress. "We can't just leave her out there," he said. "It's not a her, Brian," I snapped, my voice harsher than I intended. "It's that thing. It's trying to lure us out." The creature, realizing the woman's voice wasn't working, changed tactics. The new voice that echoed from the darkness was a perfect imitation of Brian's. "Hey guys, it's gone. I'm out by the truck. It's totally gone." That was it for Brian. Hearing his own voice, perfectly mimicked, coming from the dark woods, broke something in him. A switch flipped from fear to a kind of panicked, irrational rage. "I'm not playing this game," he screamed. Before either Cal or I could stop him, he lunged for the door, unthrew the bolt, and yanked it open. He stepped out onto the porch, brandishing one of the heavy flashlights like a club. "You want to mess with us? Come on," he yelled into the darkness. For a second, nothing happened. The clearing was empty. Brian took another step forward, a look of defiant triumph on his face. And then it came. Not from the front, but from the side. From the roof. The creature had climbed onto the low-pitched roof of the cabin. It dropped down behind Brian with a horrifying thud, silent as a cat. We saw it in perfect, terrible clarity in the moonlight. It was even bigger up close. Its fur was coarse and matted, a patchwork of black and dark gray. Its massive, muscular torso tapered down to a narrow waist, and those powerful, backward-jointed legs. Its eyes glowed with a faint, predatory yellow-green light. It unfolded itself to its full height, towering over Brian. Brian didn't even have time to scream. The creature's impossibly long arm shot out. The 5-fingered, clawed hand clamped down on Brian's head. There was a sickening, wet crunch, like a melon being crushed. And then it just lifted him off his feet, his body limp, and flung him into the darkness of the woods like a broken doll. The whole thing took less than 2 seconds. Cal and I reacted on pure instinct. We slammed the door shut and threw the bolt, just as the creature crashed against it from the outside. The wood screamed, and the doorframe splintered. We both threw our full weight against the door as the thing began to pound on it with unimaginable force. Each impact was like being hit by a car. The whole cabin shook. "The table!" Cal yelled over the din. We dragged the heavy wooden dining table and wedged it under the doorknob, piling our cots and gear against it as a barricade. The pounding on the door stopped. But our relief was short-lived. We heard a crash of glass from the other side of the room. It was at the window again. It had smashed right through the wooden shutters. A long, dark arm snaked through the broken opening, claws scrabbling against the interior wall, searching for purchase. Cal was already moving. He grabbed the remaining camp axe, ran to the window, and swung it with all his might. He hit the creature's forearm. There was a wet thud and a hideous, high-pitched shriek of pain and rage from outside. The arm was pulled back out of the window so fast, it was just a blur. We heard it crash through the undergrowth, retreating into the woods. We stood there, panting, chests heaving, listening to the creature's enraged howls echo through the hollow. We had hurt it. We had made it angry. We knew it would be back. We had a brief respite, and we used it. "We have to reinforce this place," I said, my voice tight. We worked with a desperate, focused energy born of pure terror. We tore planks from the cots and nailed them over the broken window. We checked the other 2 windows, making sure the shutters were secure. We piled everything we had left against the main door. As we worked, I noticed something else. There wasn't just one set of howls anymore. The first creature's cries were being answered by another, from a different direction. There were 2 of them. My heart sank. We weren't fighting a lone monster. We were fighting a pack. The next hour was a blur of psychological torture. They didn't launch an all-out assault again. They were smarter than that. They circled the cabin, growling, scraping their claws on the walls. They would throw rocks against the roof, sudden sharp cracks in the night that made us jump every time. They were testing us, wearing us down, letting our fear and exhaustion do their work for them. They were hunting us like experienced trackers, using sound and pressure to herd their prey. At one point, Cal and I were crouched near the back wall when we heard a new sound. It was the distinct metallic clang of the generator housing being ripped open, followed by the sound of wires being torn out. The single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered and died, plunging us into total darkness, save for the faint glow of the stove. They had cut our power. They were thinking, planning, dismantling our defenses one by one. "They're smart, Mark," Cal said, his voice grim. "They're tactically smart." He was right. This wasn't some dumb beast acting on instinct. This was intelligent, coordinated, and utterly malevolent. The final assault began just before dawn. The sky was just starting to lighten in the east, turning from black to a deep indigo. Maybe they knew their time was limited. The attack came from 2 sides at once. One of them began hammering on the front door again, the blows even more powerful than before. We could hear the wood of the door itself starting to split. At the same time, the other one went back to the back wall, the one it had tried to claw through earlier. But this time, it wasn't just clawing. It was using its whole body, ramming the wall like a living battering ram. Boom. The whole cabin shook. Boom. A picture frame fell off the wall and shattered. Boom. The plank started to groan and bow inward. We knew we couldn't stay. The cabin was our tomb, and the walls were closing in. We were going to die here. I looked at Cal. Our eyes met in the dim light. We both knew there was only one chance, and it was a slim one. The truck. If one of us could make it to the truck, maybe we could get away. It was a 100-foot sprint across open ground. A suicide run. "I'll draw them to the back," Cal said, his voice calm and resolute. He picked up the axe. "When you hear me yell, you run for the truck. Don't stop. Don't look back. Just go." "Cal, no," I started to say, but he cut me off. "There's no other way, Mark. One of us has to get out. To tell someone. Now get ready." He moved toward the back wall, which was now splintering with every impact. The creature at the front door was redoubling its efforts, a furious, frenzied assault. Cal took a deep breath. He looked at me one last time and gave me a short, sharp nod. The nod we'd used 1,000 times in the field to mean, go. Then he turned, and with a guttural roar of his own, he started swinging the axe at the already weakened back wall, chopping his way out. "Hey, over here, you sons of bitches!" he screamed. The pounding at the front door stopped instantly. The creature at the back roared in surprise and fury. I heard it scramble away from the wall as Cal burst through the splintered planks into the pre-dawn gloom. I didn't hesitate. I ran to our barricade, tore it down as fast as I could, unbolted the door, and sprinted out onto the porch. I risked one glance behind the cabin. I saw two massive, dark shapes converging on Cal. He was swinging the axe wildly, a desperate, valiant last stand. I saw one of the creatures grab the axe from his hands, bend the thick hickory handle in half, as if it were a twig, and toss it aside. I didn't see any more. I did what he told me to. I ran. My lungs burned, my legs pumped, my boots pounded on the cold, hard dirt. The truck seemed 1,000,000 miles away. I could hear the sounds of the fight behind me, a horrible symphony of roars, and a single, abruptly silenced human scream. I didn't look back. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit the key in the ignition. The engine turned over, roaring to life in the quiet morning. As I slammed the truck into gear, one of the creatures emerged from behind the cabin. It saw me. It was smeared with blood, Cal's blood. Its yellow eyes locked on mine, and it let out a sound of pure, unadulterated hatred. It charged. I stomped on the gas pedal. The tires spun in the dirt, catching, and the truck lurched forward. The creature was unbelievably fast. It covered the distance in a few loping strides, leaping onto the hood of the truck, just as I started to pull away. Its face was right there, inches from me, separated only by the windshield. I saw it clearly now. The coarse black fur, the long canine snout filled with yellow, dagger-like teeth, the intelligent, malevolent eyes burning with a hellish light. It raised a clawed hand and brought it down on the windshield. The safety glass spider-webbed, exploding inward, showering me with tiny cubes of glass. I swerved the wheel hard to the left. The truck skidded, and the creature was thrown from the hood. It rolled and came up on its feet instantly. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I floored it, fishtailing down the dirt track, away from the cabin, away from the hollow, away from the nightmare. I looked in my rear-view mirror. I could see it standing in the middle of the track, watching me go. Then it raised its head to the lightening sky and let out a long, triumphant howl that chased me all the way back to civilization. I drove like a madman. I don't remember much of it, just the rattling of the truck and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I finally hit the paved county road and just kept driving until I saw the lights of a small town. I pulled into the parking lot of the sheriff's department, my truck riddled with dents and a shattered windshield. I stumbled inside, covered in glass and dirt, babbling like an idiot. The deputy on duty thought I was drunk or on drugs. They put me in a small interrogation room that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. Eventually the sheriff came in. He was an older man, with a tired face and eyes that had seen too much. I told him everything. I told him about the tracks, the deer, the cabin, Brian, Cal. I know how I must have sounded, crazed, unhinged. He listened patiently, not interrupting. When I was finished, He just sighed. He left the room and came back a few minutes later with a cup of water. "Son," he said, his voice gentle, "you've been through a major trauma. It's clear something bad happened out there. We'll send a team up to the cabin at first light. My guess is you boys ran into a bear. A big one, maybe rabid. People get confused when they're scared. The mind plays tricks." I tried to argue. I told him it wasn't a bear. I described the creature, its hands, its intelligence. He just nodded, that same patient, placating look on his face. He was treating me like a child who'd just seen a monster under the bed. I was taken to the local clinic, treated for minor cuts, and given a sedative. The next day, 2 deputies drove me back to the sheriff's office. The official story was set. A large, unusually aggressive black bear had attacked our campsite. Brian and Cal were listed as missing, presumed deceased. The search party found scraps of their clothing, the damaged cabin, and my damaged truck. They also found bear tracks, lots of them. It was neat, it was tidy, it was a lie. My own statement was dismissed as the product of shock and trauma. They strongly suggested I seek psychological counseling. I was getting ready to leave, to just get in my broken truck and drive away, when one of the older deputies, a man named Henderson, pulled me aside. He was a lanky, weathered man who hadn't said a word during my whole ordeal. He led me to a quiet corner of the office. "You're not going back up there, are you?" he asked, his voice low. "No," I said. "Never." He nodded slowly. "Good. You listen to me. I've worked this county for 35 years. You ain't the first person to come out of those woods talking about things that ain't supposed to exist. We had a group of hunters disappear from that same hollow back in the 80s. Found their camp torn to shreds. Found one of their rifles bent in half around a tree." He looked me dead in the eye. "The official report will say bear. It always says bear. It's easier that way. But you and I know what you saw. There are some things in these mountains that are older than the trees. Things you don't mess with. You got out. That makes you luckier than most. Go home, Mr. Ryland. Sell your business, move to a city, and never, ever come back to these woods. Forget what you saw. It's the only way you'll stay sane." He walked away without another word, leaving me standing there alone. He was the only person who believed me, and his advice was the most terrifying thing I had heard yet, because it meant he knew. It meant this had happened before, and it would happen again. I took his advice. I drove back to Roanoke, sold my company, sold my house. I couldn't be near the mountains anymore. The sight of a dense tree line was enough to trigger a panic attack. I moved to a flat, open city in the Midwest, where I can see the horizon in every direction. I live in a 3rd-floor apartment. I don't camp. I don't hike. I don't even like city parks after dark. I live with what happened every day. I see it every time I close my eyes. I see Brian's confused face in the instant before he was killed. I see Cal, my best friend, turning to face 2 monsters with nothing but an axe and a suicidal amount of courage. The guilt is a physical weight. I survived because he chose to die. It's a debt I can never repay. I know no one will believe this story. It will be dismissed as fiction, as the ramblings of a traumatized mind. I don't care. I'm not telling it for them. I'm telling it for Cal and for Brian. Their official record says they were killed by a bear. I am the only one left who knows the truth. The truth is, there are things in this world, hiding in the deep, dark places, that we are not meant to understand. They are ancient, they are intelligent, and they are hostile. So now, I stay inside. I check the locks on my doors 3 times before I go to bed. Sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet, I think I can hear a distant howl on the wind. It's probably just a siren or a dog, but I know what it sounds like. And I know that what happened in that hollow wasn't an end. It was just a glimpse behind a curtain we are not supposed to see. The world is not what we think it is. There are still monsters out there, and they are hungry.